Right. And we're getting started here at Western Civilization. Start off our discussions of the semester with the Enlightenment. Looking at the ideas and the people behind them. Bernard de Fontenelle, Isaac Newton, John Locke, Philosos, Charles II, Baron de Montesquieu, that part of the title nobility, Voltaire, pen name, Miss Diderot, Adam Smith, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Mary Astell, and Mary Wollstonecraft. Any questions on those?
No.
Let's say the greatest hits the Enlightenment. And so, when we look at human nature and look at human history, we see that the greatest accomplishments, the greatest achievements of humanity have always been those with the mind. It is the mind that is responsible for our imagination, our creativity, for our ideas, perceptions of the world and the universe around us. So we solve problems, we create new ideas, we create beautiful works of art, all the good and bad actions we create start with our mind. And every so often there's an age in humanity where there's a massive surge in knowledge and interest in the powers of human ability to think and create. The Enlightenment is one of those eras. We live in one of those eras ourselves. Like I say, today with the Internet, we have the sum of human knowledge at our fingertips. Anything you want to know on anything, just simply type in a few words. It's there within seconds. Of course, most people use it to post pictures of cats, but that's... But what we see happening here, the rapid changes in technology in our day, is a world rapidly changing. So we use now as an indispensable tools, in 20 years will be obsolete, hopelessly quaint. And how many people phones still have in their homes a phone with a cord to it? Last holdout.
No, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, so you know the struggle of only being able to go a certain distance from home.
No, I know. I have a cordless phone.
Cordless, yeah. But consider the computer this is recorded on, the laptop she's using here. Actually, a reasonable state of technology for the year 2016. 2020, who's asking why you're still using it?
So like a time period, like I said, of years that technology is the biggest surge in technology. Is there a certain time for that, or is the same amount?
There's not a certain time for these different eras. It expands. It's different time periods. Maybe only a few decades, could be a few centuries. It really does kind of depend. Unfortunately, they're often followed by it's a rather dark and reactionary age afterward. People are running from technology and science and shunning it at all any chance they can. But consider your cell phone. Can I borrow that for a second? Yeah, get rid of the evidence. Exit. It's a tablet. It's a state-of-the-art. You can use it for anything. Making phone calls. You can call the satellite phone system. You can call anyone, anywhere in the world instantly. So you can play games on it. You can play, you can mount your checkbook. You can take pictures of this. You can record movies, sound. You can read the news, access the internet from this. Very sophisticated piece of machinery. 3 years from now, it'll be obsolete. outdated. Like I said, there's more computing power on this than there was on the Apollo missions on the space capsules sent into the moon. Like I said, there's more computing power than this than all the computers in the world in 1946. And yet it is about to be obsolete. And compared to the other computers we have now, some of the real supercomputers, well, it's a little more than a toy. That's how fast technology is changing. Short time, this will be obsolete.
That's 10 points, right?
Absolutely. Checks in the mail.
No, 10 points on the class. That was no problem.
I think it changes in medical technology. Like I said, 20 years ago, AIDS was a death sentence. Today, medications, it can be treated. Cancer is considered to be inoperable, death sentence 20, 30 years ago. Treatable now. 30 years ago, they said there was nothing they could do if you're having a stroke. They could get there enough time, they could do something to break the clot and minimize the damage. Every disease that has haunted man for centuries is either on its way to being cured or has a cure already. We wiped out entire diseases. Smallpox, polio is nearly wiped out. Diseases that have killed millions of people now. Nobody worries about it because cured, mass vaccination, and so forth.
Do you think all this technology growth is somewhat detrimental?
I say it depends on how you use it. Is technology good or bad? It depends on how you use it. For example, the same science that gives us the atomic bomb also gives us TV sets in the microwave oven. It also gives us MRI scans.
But as far as all the technology becomes obsolete, would that be detrimental in itself?
Except there'll be problems with it. For example, what are the batteries of these old phones filling up landfills? These old phones just disposed and kicked to the side. You got to put the trash somewhere. Like I said, it's an issue some people do have to come up with. But think about junkyards piled up with millions and millions of old cars. Detroit's best days rusting away in a junkyard somewhere. So yeah, there are. Like I said, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Good sides to it, and there are bad sides to it. But we see, though, with these changes in technology in these eras, these explosions of knowledge, wisdom, hopefully wisdom accompanying it, is people are changing the way they look at the world. Like say somebody gets sick, we think, well, take them to the doctor, or why don't they have a cure for that yet? Well, in this time period, even the best and brightest minds found the fact that people are going to have very, very short, very brutal lives. That disease could take anybody at a moment's notice without mercy. The conditions they treatable. They treat conditions people would live normal, productive lives with. Nothing they could do for it back then. That's how they saw the world versus how we see the world. See, we live in a world of more than 7 billion people. Thousands of languages, thousands of religions, thousands of cultural and historical perspectives. Each one is a little different from the other. It's this big old wide world outside of South Arkansas. Big old wide world outside your frame of references and experiences. I'm going to pass out something to y'all here. First hand up the semester. I may be noticing, why can't you read any of these words here?
German.
It's in German.
That's the way I can.
Yeah, on the other side, yes, map in Spanish. What you see is two very different ways of looking at the world. One side, a map in Spanish. I think maybe familiar landmarks to you. Notice the words are very strange. Oceano Atlántico, Mar Mediterráneo, Alemania, Francia, España, the United Kingdom, Reino Unido, North Sea, Mar del Norte. On the other side, German, Deutschland, Frankreich, Großbritannien, Sweden, Finland, Weißrussland, etc., etc. So the Mediterranean Mittelmeer, Black Sea, Schwarzes Meer. Words and ideas shape how you see the world. So just as these words, these ideas start changing the world. You see, language, it is part of your identity. It's part of how you identify yourself, part of how you see the world. Like I said, most of us brought up here in the United States. So, we think in English, we write in English, we consider ourselves English speakers, we dream in English. You're born Spanish-speaking or German-speaking in parts of the world. Same thing except in Russian. Like I say, and the words we see here don't exactly translate well from one language to another. Evenly yet. Example, Mar Mediterráneo, Mediterranean Sea. You have 2 words in English, 2 words in Spanish. 1 word in German. Russian, no articles as a part of speech. Or say a and the in English, similar in other languages. They don't have that in Russian. Actually, and as people learn, especially to learn other languages, it's an important skill because you get to see word relationships in your own language as well seeing how other people think, how other people see the world in other languages. Like say you can read an author's original thoughts in his own original language. So of course most of the works we read are of course in the original English, but I think some of the popular literature in the United States that was not originally written in English. The Bible, for example. First copies written down were in Greek and Latin, not even Aramaic, ancient Hebrew. Actually, in this couple of words, couple of the subtle differences in the meaning of words translate to one another, completely changes the meaning, completely changes how people look at the world. One idea, one word can change the world. And it all starts with a willingness to see the world from a different point of view. Instead of reading Denmark, reading Danimark. Instead of reading Great Britain or the United Kingdom, reading Randy, we need to looking at the world from a different point of view. And that's what makes these figures of the Enlightenment worth reading and worth paying attention to centuries later. Ideas that change the world. Change how people see themselves, see the world, see the universe. They're me asking big questions about existence, about life, the universe, everything. In turn, that's going to change everything. People are asking all sorts of questions. What is the proper role of man between his fellow man? What's the proper role between man and the state, between man and God, man and the universe? They come out with very different, very interesting, very different answers. Not always the traditional ones you might expect. Asking questions, finding answers, starts changing the world. Willing to look at something from a different point of view. Now, the Enlightenment, it's basically taking place in the very late 17th century, but mostly the early 18th century. Taking place essentially in Europe. So you have this time period is new science emerging, but also the New World, new colonies, new frontiers to conquer, both physical and mental. The Enlightenment was spurred on by the scientific revolution in the 1600s and its new understanding of the world. Such things as heliocentrism, which was the radical idea that the Earth orbits the Sun. Center of the universe, the center of the solar system. And of course, the Earth orbits the Sun. I think in the 21st century, we have satellites in orbit. We see that all the time. It makes sense. 1700, still a very radical idea. That fancy book learning. Next, quick disclaimer here. No one actually ever seriously thought the world was flat. Yeah.
You, when you get time tonight, look up Flat Earth on YouTube. I don't believe in it, but there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there that people believe the Earth is flat, and it's all a conspiracy theory. The sun's really only a few hundred miles from Earth. It's not as big as what they say.
Yes, all those thermonuclear reactions are going off every second. That's just 400 miles away.
I mean, I still look at that stuff, although I don't believe it. Just
Yeah.
see people's.
Just to laugh at and make fun. See, mental health is a good thing. But I'm glad that's an excellent point here. The dangers of the internet and widespread knowledge is being able to set out what's useful and what's reliable and what's some guy having a nervous breakdown. Like I said, on the internet you see anything and everything. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. If you think it, you want to put it on the internet, you put it on the internet. And of course, say the Earth, that somebody says, okay, the Earth is flat. Okay, no evidence to back it up. Just, I think it's conspiracy. Some paranoid mindset where they think that everyone else is out to get them, and they're the only ones who have the real answer. They figured it out before anyone else has, so they must be special. And they know what everyone else is thinking before they think it. Basically, actually, you can look at the Earth, look at the curve of the horizon around us. Okay, if the Earth is flat, how come we can't see all the way to the Atlantic Ocean? If the Earth is flat, how come you're riding in an airplane? How come the horizon is noticeably curving away from you? Again, logical deduction. That's what the scientific revolution is doing, saying, look at evidence around you. Research. Look correctly. Be willing to have the humility to admit, maybe you don't have all the answers. Maybe like that guy on the internet, no sense of humility, no sense of intelligence, no sense of logic. Just, I'm right, I want to be right, I'm going to throw a fit until people start agreeing with me.
There's a lot of people following. You'd be surprised. Like, there's a lot of followers that believe in this. Like, I think there's several people that believe in the theories, and then people following because they believe whatever they're following.
Oh yeah. I remember some people can't think for themselves. Some people think, oh, there has to be conspiracy because, well, the internet somehow attracts communities of like-minded people. People who are mentally unbalanced, people who are racist, people who are interested in science, people who are interested in Star Wars, and so forth. I mean, separate the two. I love Star Wars. Big fan of it. Seen every movie since I was, the first one came out when I was 2. And yes, I think J.J. Abrams destroys every movie he touches, but discussion another day. But Like I said, but I'm also fascinated by science. I see a science fiction movie, I can see how they can make that work. They did this, this, and this. Like I said, it's joy and excitement and imagination. It's also there's a lot of interest in just looking, seeing how the world works. But as a scholar, as a human being, you have to have the humility to admit that you don't always have all the answers. Like I said, there are a lot of people who, like I said, either they're lonely or they're gullible or they just are not mentally sound, easily fall prey to conspiracy theories. Like I said, no evidence to back them up, but they just believe it anyway.
I have to remember because we've never been to the moon and there was really no darkness.
Yeah. Exactly. People who are just, well, to be honest, there are a lot of people in this world who are not very intelligent.
A lot of
And you know what comedian George Carlin once said? He was a real cynic. He had a very colorful way of looking at things. He said, imagine how dumb the average person is, and realize that half the people in the world are dumber than that. It's not a nice thing to say, but it's for Kurt Vonnegut's look at the world, said, just understand that most people in the world really are doing the best they can. That's an encouraging thought and scary at the same time. But again, no evidence. They're not going to look at any evidence, but they decided they know the answer. Well, dinosaurs never existed. How they think that? Well, gee, I never saw one. Well, they've been dead 65 million years. Don't confuse my mind with facts. It's conspiracy. What about all those fossils? They're just funny shaped rocks people make up. I haven't actually been to a museum and seen one. Again, they'll find whatever kind of evidence you have, they'll have some kind of way of just discarding it. And you know what ends up happening to those kinds of people? What happens to kind of cultures that live like that is eventually
They become
obsolete. They're left behind. Like say China, up to the 1400s, 1500s, was a rich, advanced society. But they shut themselves off from the rest of the world, refused to look at the rest of the world or explore. Became divided among themselves, and by the early 20th century, they were the basket case of the world. China was backwards, primitive, no technology, impoverished. It was a joke. In just a very short time. At the fall of the Roman Empire, people gave up learning, communicating. So you have this 1,000-year void in European history where there's basically nothing going on. No advances, no technology, no reading. And of course you have those people who try to refuse to look at the world because they have an agenda. And that agenda is more important than things like truth, integrity, wisdom, or honor. A few years ago, there was in a little town in New England, a guy walked into an elementary school and shot and killed a bunch of kids. That's called Sandy Hook Elementary School. There are people on the internet to this day who believe that didn't happen. They follow the families of those murdered children, telling them their kids never existed. They're all lying. Yeah. There are people who are that low and that cruel. Why? Because they have an agenda.
And don't put it on the 9/11 conspiracy.
Yeah, 9/11 conspiracy. Global warming. Scientists say the Earth is changing. Man's activities are causing it. They have the evidence to show it. They have ice core samples showing bubbles of air from thousands of years ago. It's sent on it to the present day, showing how atmospheric gases are changing. Source of that, industrialization. Like that, causing changes in the environment. So slowly and subtly for now, but it could changed very drastically over time. People want to deny that. Why? They have an agenda. Understand, why are the problems in the world today? Because a lot of people have a vested interest in keeping things the way they are. Yeah, money. For example, Flint, Michigan recently. For several years, the governor of Michigan decided, well, the city of Flint can't run itself, so he's going to appoint someone to basically rule the city as a dictator, override the city council, city officials, and make all decisions for them. They decided the way to save money be change the city's water supply from Lake Huron to Flint River. Now, Flint, Michigan, it was the home of several major auto manufacturers for decades. What did they do? They dumped everything in the river. Lead, toxic waste, the point, water's undrinkable. But to save money, the governor of Michigan and his emergency manager of the city of Flint made the people drink this contaminated water. Why? Money. He was told it was a problem. He knew it. He did it anyway. Just didn't care. Why? Because people of Flint weren't people were going to vote for him anyway. Saying this is the world we live in. Because to be a citizen of the world, to be a functioning member of society, you have to seek knowledge, you have to seek wisdom. You have to be willing to change your mind about the world. Except think about your ideas, some of your ideas about the world when you were a kid versus how the world works now. Your explanations for various things. My grandmother liked to tell a story when she was a kid and she saw it raining outside. She thought it was raining all over the world. That's a cute story, but it's not the way the world is. It's raining in your location. It's raining in your location. Whether elsewhere is something different. Actually, I remember I was a kid watching this documentary on hurricanes, early 1980s, from saying the course of a hurricane is unpredictable. Early 1980s, we'd already been to the moon. We have computers, very primitive by modern standards. Satellite forecast techniques. They still had no idea how to track hurricanes. It's probably going to go this direction. We can't be entirely sure. Now they can pinpoint it. It's going to go this way. Might start going this way within a few miles, the radius of a few miles. These never be able to predict tornadoes because of Doppler radar. They can predict them probably within about 5 minutes of them forming. Because somebody decided, I'm going to change my mind. I'm going to throw off the idea that tornadoes are completely unpredictable, that hurricanes are unpredictable. I'm going to see if I can, I'm going to ask myself a question if I can change that, if I can actually figure it out. And a lot of time, a lot of work went into it. You have technology that saved countless lives. Because somebody changed the way they looked at the world. Now, in the Enlightenment, the word for the day is reason. Reason, logical deduction. The ability of the mind to make a conclusion from a series of facts. It gives us such things as calculus, the scientific method. It's how scientists figure things out. System of experimentation, study of a particular phenomenon. Calculus. It's a mathematical system of making large-scale summations very quickly. It's indispensable in physics, engineering, architecture, and many other scientific and engineering endeavors. All coming from this time period. All coming from reason. The Enlightenment believed that progress of the human condition was possible. The way things are, all the problems we have do not have to exist. We can change the world. People don't have to starve. People don't have to die of disease. People don't have to be homeless. There doesn't have to be corruption. There doesn't have to be war. All these problems of man, created by man, could be solved by man. They weren't at the mercy of forces beyond us. That we could learn, we could adapt. That one tool that allowed humanity to survive from the very beginning in a very hostile world. Our ability to think, imagine, and adapt. 1784, German philosopher Immanuel Kant described the Enlightenment in this age of reason as man's leaving his self-caused immaturity. Man leaving his self-caused immaturity. So what is happening is basically a revolution of the mind. You have these figures called philosophes. Basically, these are Enlightenment intellectuals. It's not philosopher, it's philosophe. It's a French word. The great thinkers of the time, the writers, scientists, these are the philosophes. Using a lot of French terminology, I have a lot of French figures here because a lot of the Enlightenment was taking place in France. It was, at that point, still an important center of learning and science at that time period. Except among these figures you have is Bernard de Fontenelle. Man lived to be 100 years old at the time period. That was unheard of. Born in 1657, died in 1757. He wrote a book called Plurality of Worlds. Through this book, he's trying to popularize the new science, trying to bring it to a new audience, trying to explain to people what are all these different ideas, what are we, why are they important, what are they useful for, how do they work. He starts out basically as a story, a scientist talking to this noblewoman who's he's hearing about all these new ideas, and the scientist is explaining to her one at a time. Another thing about heliocentrism, or the idea of the Earth orbiting the Sun. Of course, along the way, though, these ideas like heliocentrism and other ideas were running contrary to a lot of fundamentalist church beliefs, a lot of beliefs about the Bible interpretation, particularly within the Roman Catholic Church at this time period. So the church started fighting these ideas, trying to deny they exist, trying to discredit them. And the more they did so, and the more the scientists looked at all the evidence piling up behind them, all the mathematical calculations, a steady divide between religion and science grew in Europe. Where once the church had been the chief sponsor of education and scientific science in Europe, that's becoming less and less the case. There's growing skepticism about Christianity in the 18th century, growing secularization, atheism becoming more common, people believing there wasn't a God at all, agnosticism, people weren't sure. You also have deism becoming popular, Unitarianism. Deism basically is the idea that you believe there's a creator God, that God created the universe, but he stepped back and let the universe run on its own. Basically, a clockmaker just created the universe, wound it up, and just let it go on its own, not interfering in the ordinary activities of the universe. Again, people asking questions, people changing their minds. Doesn't mean that every scientist had to be an atheist or deist. No. Very many of them weren't. But a lot of people were looking at the world very differently, changing their minds, and having very different opinions. Now we'll take probably one of the famous figures this time period, Isaac Newton. Like I said, the way we see Albert Einstein in our own age, or Stephen Hawking in our own age, as a symbol of genius and intelligence, basically the very embodiment of it, Isaac Newton was for his time. Except he failed his laws on science, his laws on gravitation, motion, optics. In completely revolutionizing the world of science. Basically, the fundamental mathematical formulas and equations and theories that we use to calculate such things as momentum of satellites, rockets, jet aircraft, engineering principles. Isaac Newton. Actually, this is a result of Newton's world. And of course, gets everyone to thinking about new ways of thinking how the universe works. The universe can be reduced to a simple mathematical formula. Now, John Locke wrote a book in 1690 called Two Treatises of Government. You see, it comes back from the Glorious Revolution in England, 1688. The king, was a budding tyrant. He was overthrown. His king's sister and her husband brought in as the new king and queen of England. And people were celebrating it, the Glorious Revolution. So the tyrant was overthrown without a drop of blood being spilled. Basically, just the threat just made the guy pick up and leave. That's a lot of people celebrating this, but others saying, no, it's a disaster. Particularly a man named Sir Robert Filmer wrote a book called Patriarch in 1689 that said that for any kind of government to work properly, there has to only be one person in charge. Otherwise, you have division, violence, civil war, all sorts of uprisings and attempts to seize control of the government. And like I say, to have law and order and stability in society, you can only have one person in charge, basically one king, absolute, unquestioned power. You have a philosopher, John Locke, comes along, reads that, says, that's a bunch of nonsense. Writes his refutation of it, called Two Treatises of Government. Now what he has here is something called contract theory. Basically the idea of how should a government work. And this idea is people enter into society, basically, there's a contract, either written through a constitution, series of laws, or unwritten just by a series of understandings. Basically, the idea is that people have certain rights, certain liberties. They have life, liberty, and property, basically, protection of what they have, protection of their existence, right to speak their minds. They have that, but the government, its purpose is to protect that. Protect the people. Protect their rights from external threats and even internal threats. That's basically the social contract.
You said the other book was Robert Ford, 1689?
Yeah. Yeah. A book called Patriarch, but don't get worried about that now. But two treatises. Basically, the book's divided in two parts. The first part, the first treatise, is a refutation of Sir Robert Filmer and the idea of absolutism. Basically goes line by line through his book, refuting every argument, saying this is basically a bunch of nonsense. Of course, one thing to criticize somebody. It's easy to pick apart somebody else's argument, but another thing to be basically create your own new argument, which was contract theory. The government has the duty to protect life, liberty, and property. is why we enter into societies is for mutual protection. Human beings are funny creatures. We're social creatures, but we don't seem to like each other very much. But we recognize, though, that we need each other every so often for protection or just company. So the government has a duty to protect life, liberty, and property, but also the kicker here, if the government breaks its contract, does not protect your life, liberty, and property, it becomes an opponent of it, people can change governments. There is majority principle. A first thing I was quiet through the vote, but next thing you just throw it out and start all over again if you want. Basically the idea, majority principle, the idea that people, all people, have certain rights. That was a radical idea in 1690. Especially in a class-based society like England, they really believed that some people were better than others. Yeah. So what's going to happen here is this idea is going to kind of kick around a little bit back and forth. People are going to ask the question: what is the proper role of government? What would be the proper relationship between man and the state? Well, fast forward a few decades, 1776, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. A group of colonists upset in England, ready to declare independence for the colonies from England. They feel like they need a statement to the world. What does Thomas Jefferson use? John Locke. There's John Locke to justify why are the colonies breaking away from England. Because England, he felt, was destructive of these ends of serving life, liberty, and property. Or they changed it, the Declaration of Independence sounds a little more poetic, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. It's an inner commentary there. But essentially, one book, one idea, one person affects others. And eventually, even change the world. One equation, a series of equations, it changes the world. Locke changes the world. And its belief among the Enlightenment philosophers is the more people know about these ideas, the more people understand these ideas, the more they can understand the world, the more they can make a positive difference in the world, the more we can do to make this world a better place. For some of the ancient evils and privations that have haunted us. Because the world does not have to be the way it is. We can do better. So we don't have to live in fear and superstition. We have knowledge, we have minds, we develop wisdom. We can overcome what we have. And that's what Enlightenment is trying to do. We have others that are looking at different ideas of society and government, particularly Charles II, Baron de Montesquieu. Wrote two interesting books, one called Persian Letters in 1721. Persian Letters basically it's a fictional take on the traditional travel log. Basically, it was very popular at the time period as people be traveling all over the world, all over Europe, and they were writing about their experiences. So in this case, it's a series of two fictional Persians, basically from France. That's about as basically as far to the ends of the earth as they could possibly go. Basically, dropping two people who were completely foreign to France, who knew nothing about France, dropping them in it, and having them figure out just how does French society work. Basically, just having France take a look at itself from a different point of view. Why do they do these things? Why do they have the Roman Catholic Church monarchy? Why do they have an absolute monarchy? Why do people treat each other certain ways? Why do they have certain mannerisms and social customs? And so these Persian letters, these two Persians are writing back about the very strange things they're seeing and noticing about how France works. And in this book, it's deeply critical of the Roman Catholic Church and the French monarchy. About certain rituals, certain practices of the church, certain mindsets of the church, how they seem to be hindering progress. French monarchy, how it seemed to be hindering freedoms of the people. This became an attack on traditional religion, but also advocated religious toleration, a very radical concept from France in 1721. France is officially a Roman Catholic country. It doesn't have any rights at all. You had to be Roman Catholic in France. Said what the second Dawes is suggesting is let people make up their own mind about religion. He denounced slavery. Believed people should be able to use reason to free themselves from prejudices. Follows up with another book in 1748, Spirit of the Laws, talking about government. Attempted to ascertain there are certain natural laws that govern human relations. Basically, they believe that there are basically three basic forms of government. I learned to write. Among these were republics, which required a lot of citizen involvement. Basically, majority rule, people vote for representatives who make the laws for them. They felt that would work best for small states. So in Italy, there were some small city-states that were republics. It seemed to work well for them. A monarchy, you have a ruling class adhering to the law, basically, not absolutism, but basically one person in charge, but certain limitations on their power, certain things they can and can't do. I think that's best for medium-sized states, like say England or something like that. Then he has despotism. As apt for large empires, use fear to inspire obedience. Basically, absolute power, terrorize the population by any means necessary to maintain order. What he's thinking about here is Russia. Russia had essentially a absolute monarchy at this time. And so it kind of got people to think about how government should work. But you got people, a lot of poets and playwrights this time period, among them Voltaire, who's a pen name for a man named Francois-Marie Aure. He's a playwright. It's very racy and very amusing tracks, among them Candide, play still read in a lot of English classes. 300 years old, still laugh out loud at it. Very racy, very blistering assault on religious corruption and the extremes of reason. Basically, in the debate between science and religion, it makes fun of both sides. Says you're both going too far. Voltaire was middle class. He was had a classical education, Jesuit schools. Born in 1694, died in 1778. Very popular writer and playwright. Wrote a book some years after Candide called Treatise on Toleration. There's samples of works here on page 520. Picture them here on page 519. But the Treatise on Toleration is written in 1763. He argued that people should have the right to make their own minds about what church they go to, if they go to one at all. have the right to make up their own mind about religious issues, about questions about the nature of God and religion. They tries to point out that religious toleration had created no problems in countries like England and Holland, where you had relative freedom of religion. And concluded saying that, quote, all men are brothers under God. But of course, you have other figures along the way. Denis Diderot, also on here, page 519, from 1713 to 1784. Diderot's claim to fame is a work called the Encyclopedia. Now, it's not like the encyclopedia you know and use today, basically a collection of articles describing different subjects. Instead, his encyclopedia is 28 volumes, basically a series of articles written by the leading minds of the Enlightenment discussing different ideas on science and philosophy. Basically, editorials. It's all 28 volumes. Very popular seller at the time. But essentially he's using this to try to spread the ideas of the Enlightenment to as large an audience as possible. He's Diderot, son of a skilled craftsman in France. A freelance writer, he also enjoyed studying different subjects in different languages. He's one of the people who just pick up foreign languages very quickly. He became disenchanted with religion, eventually condemning Christianity as fanatical and unreasonable, became an atheist, including, quote, this world is only a mass of molecules. The Frenchman will also have Adam Smith. He's Scottish. He's what they call a physiocrat. Basically an early economist. Economics is just becoming an important science field of study in the mid-18th century. His book is a book called Wealth of Nations. It's written in 1776. Adam Smith, Scotland. We're out of room here. Limited camera angle. Now, Wealth of Nations, basically it's an economic and government book. Essentially in this, he advocates the idea of laissez-faire style of economics. Laissez-faire is a French word meaning to let one do. Now, understand the perspective they're coming from this time. This time period, governments routinely intervened in business and industry. They picked winners and losers. Basically, they decided which company in a country would get a monopoly on a particular product. They would choose monopolies. So one company gets a monopoly on tea, the other on sugar, the other one on mining in certain areas or whatever else. Basically, the idea is trying to limit foreign competition as much as possible. So the government actively intervened because they felt it was a national security interest. So they're trying to keep hold of every dime they possibly can and do whatever it takes to do that. Basically, even if it meant picking one country to be a monopoly and pushing all the others out of business. Well, Smith is saying, quit doing that. Let the companies rise or fall on their own merits. Said something called the invisible hand of an industry will guide it. But when I said government should not be actively intervening, choosing winners and losers like it had, I also said businesses also have their own responsibilities they have to uphold. Among them, the safety of their safety and well-being of their workers. They're also responsible for training their workers. Believe in education. We also believe government did have certain basic functions. 3 basic functions. One of them was to protect society from invasion. The Army. Defend individuals from injustice and oppression at home, which is the police function. And that injustice and oppression can come from multiple sources. From individuals, from groups, from local governments, whatever. Police power. And to keep up and maintain public works. Because there are certain things the society needed that one person or one group couldn't put together themselves, but it was absolutely needed. So the government had to do it and make sure they were working. There's the infrastructure, roads, canals, and so forth. The government needed to build and maintain those for the common good of the public, for everyone to be able to use. And something an individual can't afford. So think about this road outside here. It's a U.S. highway. But think how much you pay in taxes every year. Your taxes couldn't afford hardly any of that road, even your entire lifetime. But we'll pool everybody's tax dollars together, and you have enough money to build a fairly nice road, maintained and safe. Again, that's part of the public works. Things for the common benefit, common use of the public that benefits everyone. Among them all the things, public education. So something that benefits everyone, something that the country needs, but not everyone can necessarily afford on their own. We have another great contract theorist, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Main claim to fame was a book called The Social Contract, written in 1762. So his works will be very influential in the French Revolution. Two treatises, Government influential in the American Revolution, Social Contract for the French Revolution, which we'll get into later on. Essentially, he begins the book very dramatically saying that man is born free, yet everywhere he is in chains. Man is born free, yet everywhere he is in chains. It's an idea for introducing democracy and representation to all. Picture of him here on page 523. Pretty much. Like I say, he's a man of his faults, and we'll find with all the interesting figures in history is that some of them do have their faults. It's shocking today. Sometimes you need someone who's kind of on the edge, kind of push society forward.
Did you say man born free in chains?
He said, Rousseau said, man is born free, yet everywhere he's in chains.
Oh.
As he was condemning slavery and absolutism alike, chaining man in different ways. But social contract, though, it's a major advance. Even though he's not talking about, has very little regard for women, including the women who bore his own children. Actually, I'll get to that story in a minute. The idea, though, that anyone should have any rights, any commoner has rights, just because the fact they exist is important. That every man should have a voice in government, that's a major advance.
But then it just apprentices by denouncing women.
Yeah, so you've got to understand those. The society of France in the 18th century, the world in the 18th century, women were kind of an afterthought. It's a male-dominated society. Women had few rights. Basically, women, if a woman was getting education or getting a job somewhere, that was considered a scandal.
But it's in their saying everybody's free and then
And people did point that out, too. That, not quite everybody was free and equal.
Progress didn't happen all at once.
Yeah. So, but the idea is saying even somebody, even expanding that idea of who should be free, who should have influence of government, that's going to be a step forward. Remember, advances in science and society aren't always straight lines and aren't always inevitable. There's stumbles along the way. So always take little baby steps along the way. If you go in directions that may not seem to make a lot of sense at first, but to get the end result. But Rousseau talks about social contract as the idea of the general will. The general will represented society's greatest aspirations. Basically, people got together and voted on these issues. The wisdom of the people would triumph, and society be moving forward in the right direction. That what was best for all, what was best for the individual. A lot of collectivism there, but the idea, though, overall, everyone needs to participate. Everyone has a voice in the process. Majority rule overall. Just let the people decide, let the majority decide. I wrote a book a few years later called Emile, the same year actually, emphasizing the importance of education. I also believe the importance of the heart and sentiment, but actually, not much of a family man. He never took care of his own children. A lot of them ended up going to foundling homes, which is basically orphanages or homes for children have been basically abandoned. That's all. He's dining with the great minds, celebrities, and royalty across Europe. His own kids are basically half starved. And he said he had no respect for women at all. But again, that's an attitude that was not uncommon at that time. It's a shocking by 21st century standards, but except at that time. But it took a lot of work and a lot of people to change those attitudes, particularly starting with these two women right here, Mary Astell and Mary Wollstonecraft. Mary Astell in 1697, she was the daughter of a wealthy coal merchant, said for women to contribute to society, they needed to be better educated. Basically, the importance of education for women as well. Women generally weren't educated at this time period because she had a father who was a man of means and loved his daughter, and because she loved learning herself, like I said, he got her all the tutors that she wanted, all the books she wanted, so she could learn as much as she wanted. Very brilliant woman, outspoken on the importance of education. Now, many believed in the inequality of the sexes at this time period. Rousseau particularly believed that there were certain natural biological differences, like you mentioned, the idea that women were supposed to be mothers. But as ignoring all the other things that women are capable of just as being human beings. So we're more than just simply some of our biological functions. When it comes to Mary Wollstonecraft. 1792, about 30 years after or so, she writes a book called Vindication of the Rights of Woman. It's a radical, groundbreaking text for the time period because she's talking about equality for women in all areas. Except some people might have said that, thought that, or grumbled that. Mary Wollstonecraft comes out, puts it to paper, and says, "This is the way it needs to be. This is the way it will be." Basically, somebody shaking things up a little bit. But again, it's going to take a long time to change a lot of social customs and ingrained ideas that we can pass down from one generation to another. So this idea of women being equal, women being able to vote, enjoy education, it'll take a long time for that to happen. But she said that subjugation of women to men was as wrong as slavery or despotism. That reason was innate to both men and women, that women had minds as well. And could be used for the benefit of mankind. And that women should have equal rights to men in education, economics, and politics. In all these areas. As she writes here in the 525 little excerpt here, said, Would men but generously snap our chains, be content with the rational fellowship instead of slavish devotion? They'd find us more observant daughters, more affectionate sisters, more faithful wives, more reasonable mothers. In a word, better citizens. We should then learn to love them with true affection because we would learn to respect ourselves, and the peace of mind of a worthy man should not be interrupted by the idle vanity of his wife. 525, 526. Basically, talks about how so many women seem to kind of waste away their lives because they're afraid of being seeing someone with a strong opinion. Because think of even in the 21st century America, we see a man with a strong opinion. What do you think? Leader, strong, determined, somebody you can respect. A woman with a strong opinion tells you what she thinks. Bossy, naggy, other things probably can't even mention. Again, same thing, but different perspectives, different look at it. And some of those ideas still hard to overcome. Some of those existing ideas still kind of hard to overcome and dispel entirely. But progress is being made. But the only way progress, though, is made is because people keep asking questions. People keep demanding that things change. People keep demanding that you look at the world from a different point of view. All right, keep reading book chapter 17 and 18 for next time. Are there any questions? If not, I bid you adieu.